Welcome to Psychology Today. I'm your host, Ann Morrow. Thank you for watching. Our show is about bicycling in general and about the celebration of the local cyclists. We hope that Psychology Today helps you inspire you to ride and helps you to be more mindful of safety. Those of us that volunteer for Psychology Today believe there's an abundance of bicycling activity to celebrate in the Portland metro area. And we endeavor to introduce you to the people who help our community of cyclists. I want to share a quick thank you to our capable crew behind the scenes, volunteers that make our show possible. Our guest is an owner of Portland's own Rose City Recumbent Cycles, Jonathan Garcia. And he'll help us understand what some of those unusual bikes we see are. Perhaps a different kind of bike would make a difference for you to get out and have fun. And Jonathan is also an innovator, and we'll find out just how that came about and what he has innovated. So let's get started. Welcome to Psychology Today, Jonathan.
Thank you, Ann.
Thanks for coming. So I always like to get to know our guests a little bit before we start talking bicycles. So give us a little bit of your background.
I grew up in Battleground, Washington,
Oh.
and then went to college at Eastern Washington University in Cheney, and spent most of my life cycling and playing music.
What kind of music do you play?
Singer-songwriter.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. So.
So it seems like you kind of have a scientific side if you're an innovator about bicycling and also an artistic side.
Yeah, they kind of converge into one.
Wow.
Yeah.
Okay. Good for you. How did you get bit by the cycling bug?
I was a BMX rider, a professional freestyle rider, and I did that for about 15 years. And I was sponsored by Schwinn Bicycles when it was actually Schwinn. When Ed Schwinn and Richard Schwinn owned it. And so that was many years ago, but I toured the U.S. As a freestyle rider.
Oh, wow.
So it's kind of paid off in the sense that it made me very sensitive to bikes and riding bikes, because we rode them, sideways and backwards and upside down and whatever way you can imagine. So it's made me a really good bike designer.
Yeah, no doubt.
So when I jump on a bike, I can sense what's wrong or what's right about it, and then translate that into the geometry part.
Yeah, I bet you have a unique insight to that. So do you ride a recumbent now?
I do, yeah. And I have for since 1999, so 20 plus years. And not exclusively, I ride other types too. Like I said, I grew up BMX riding, but I also raced mountain bikes. And so I tell people I'm a cyclist. I'm not just a recumbent rider. And so it's kind of helped me see it from the perspective of upright riders, as we call them, or traditional cyclists. We call them upright riders.
Okay.
And when we're referring to it, that's what we say, just because it's an easy way to talk about it. But with the riding recumbents can be very comfortable. It can be very relaxing. It can be also very competitive if you're a competitive rider. So there's a lot of different types of recumbents, and I think we'll get into that today.
Yeah, and I sure hope so. So tell us about some of the kinds of riding you enjoy doing now. Are you mountain bike racing now?
I'm not now, no.
Okay.
It's almost exclusively recumbents.
Okay.
For the most part. And I do, I've done 3 cycle Oregons, and I commute, and I do about between 4,000 and 5,000 miles a year. So
Whoa.
I'm a hardcore rider, I would say, or I know there's Portland wheelmen that do 10,000.
There are.
Yeah. But with work and the balance of work, so I do, a lot of it is testing new designs, and so I have particular loops that I do.
Okay.
And so I do those. There's 2 or 3 different ones, but this way I can compare all the different manufacturers and the types. So I know every inch of some of my loops.
Yeah, so just a loop that kind of incorporates a lot of different things, so that you're shifting your gears, you're using the brakes, all that good stuff.
Yeah, I'll do a Twilliger loop. I do that one a lot, and I do up the Riverside Cemetery. Everyone knows that.
Yeah.
And so I climb. I try to climb 1,000 feet a night is what I do, and more so than, it's only about 16 miles, but I go for the elevation.
Yeah.
Because that's where you really have to train in recumbents to be competitive or to, feel comfortable going up and down.
Yeah, yeah. So you just kind of touched on, I mean, being a business owner, that takes a lot of your time and a lot of commitment. So it's probably pretty hard to find time to ride. But if you're doing it, that's a good idea. It's kind of like a tax deduction almost.
Yeah,
like,
I haven't done that yet. I should deduct.
Yeah, figure that out.
Yeah.
But because you need to test the bikes, you need to be able to talk about them.
Right, and so I can speak in first person, so to and in that way, I become an authority in a sense, because I can say, oh, I've tried that, and I can tell you this equipment works and this doesn't. I've always done it my whole career. It's been 37 years in the bike industry, so It's been since I was very young, and it's been various. The rewarding time is now. In terms of having a business. We actually own two businesses.
Oh.
And one is Rose City Recumbents, and the other one is New Age Bike Works. And we formed that New Age Bike Works to import certain brands, and also that's what we design the bikes for other companies under that moniker.
Okay.
So New Age Bike Works, and that we have a warehouse for our storage of those bikes, but it's a really challenging time in the bike industry, as you've probably heard.
Yeah.
And with shipping and material shortages and whatnot. But we've really based our business on relationships, and some of those are to our friends in Taiwan, and that really has helped us get through these tough times during COVID.
So you've got some product and parts for repair and that sort of thing, as best as can be expected.
Yeah, I mean, part of it is what has helped is just having hoarded a lot of things, along the way, and that's really helped. I mean, it's we don't have a huge shop; it's only about 1,400 square feet, and then we have, like I said, we have warehouse space, so we can store some of the bikes coming in. But we have made use of it, and I know it's been challenging for everyone, not just bicycle business, but bicycles especially, because many shops have sold all the way through their inventory and they can't get any new inventory.
Yeah.
And that's not a good position to be in.
No.
So we've managed to adapt to the market as much as we can, and kind of throw out these people have thrown out lifelines for us, that we've been able to bring in new bikes and new trikes, and we do a lot of customers that are done riding we'll consign their bikes.
Oh, okay.
So that really helps.
Yeah, yeah. So let's start with, what is a recumbent? What is the definition of a recumbent?
So a recumbent is referring to the reclining chair, and that's where the name comes from. They vary more. I tell people they vary more than like the upright bikes. Upright bikes are very versatile in the sense that there's different frame sizes and there's different handlebar configurations, but you can make them do a lot of things. In the recumbent world, they're really quite different between brands or between even types. So a recumbent can have the cranks down below, or they can have them up above. The wheelbase can be short or long, and all those things are different factors that make the experience of riding recumbent very different. And I know we have some pictures later, and I can describe the different types. But recumbents have been around in the modern age since 1934 was. There were some before that, but 1934 is a kind of pivotal year, because that was the year they were first raced against upright bikes, and that was the year where a guy named Charles Mouchet designed this bike. He actually designed a four-wheel, and then he turned it into a two-wheel, and that was the first kind of production recumbent. But he was making these four-wheel cars that were just pedal cars, and for two people, and then he decided to split it in half. And so there were recumbents before that, but we're talking about the first recumbent in the modern, I guess, it's almost 100 years now.
Yeah, really.
But since then, it was really picked up in the 70s in a couple, so there was a big gap of time where nothing happened, and they were banned from the UCI from racing. So that's why they've always been a little behind, right, technology-wise.
Yeah.
So part of my push is bringing it up to speed, and in terms of all the innovations that the upright world has produced, we want to incorporate those into the recumbent bikes.
Yeah.
So that's part of what we do and part of our push in the industry. So I'm a real advocate in the industry for two-wheel recumbents especially, and we do trikes too, but that's part of my job is I help other manufacturers, analyze what's going on in the marketplace and also design products for them.
Okay,
Yeah.
Interesting. Like I said before, it's when I'm getting ready for the show, I haven't met the guest and I don't know all this cool stuff.
Yeah.
So it's kind of hard to come up, I'm not necessarily asking the best questions, but
No, I
thanks,
think
you're answering them.
Yeah, well, like I said, this is part of the reason I agreed because the
Uh-huh.
questions were so good.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah, and
Yeah.
so I appreciate the work you did to get there.
Well, and I'm interested in all the depth that you have going on over there of things that you do. So it just flashed a picture up on the screen of Pacific Northwest Recumbent Cyclists, and like you said, we're going to go into some specific pictures of specific bikes, but I just really liked that picture because it showed a bunch of happy people, and there they are again, on all kinds of different bikes. And this is in Portland, and they have a club, and they do rides.
That's right, and these are all people I know.
I'm
They're-
sure.
Yeah, and Lonnie Morse there in the Velomobile, which is that silver torpedo in the middle there. Lonnie's been, they call him the captain because he's been part of that group for a long time. And he pioneered a lot of fitting fairings to the long wheelbase. They used to ride the long wheelbase style, Toureezes and Gold Rushes, which was a brand that's out of business now. But that brand, he really was championed that brand, and so he helped a lot of recumbent riders here in the Northwest. And so Lonnie's very helpful to the community.
And every now and then we come upon them on our club rides. You come upon a big group of people.
That's right.
It's just really fun to see so many different people out just having a good time and doing these different routes. So let's go a little bit into your store and describe your store. You mentioned it was 1,400 square feet. Whereabouts is it located?
It's in Southeast Portland. It's 37th and Powell. And we've been there 6 years. And previous to that, there's two owners, myself and Robert Haller. Previous to that, we worked for Coventry Cycles. And Coventry Cycles is owned by someone named Marilyn. And Marilyn Hayward. And she was very famous in the recumbent community. And she had been hit on her recumbent and had suffered brain damage. And so when she was, she almost lost the shop, and then she had me come in, and because I had been a manager for so many shops like Gateway Bikes and Beckwith Bikes and different shops along the way, she asked me to come in and help get it situated. So that's how it started in the recumbent world for me. I had already ridden recumbents, but that was, and then when she passed away, Robert and I were just left with what are we going to do? And so we started Rose City.
Okay.
And so it's been very successful for us. And COVID, of course, has been a challenge, but
Yeah.
But it's just based on a long term, with all those years in the industry. I worked for Felt Bicycles too. I was a technical rep for them.
Okay.
So for a year I traveled to different shops. So I was able to visit about 150 shops in 1 year. And so when I did that, I learned a lot about, I already knew about the bike shop culture, but then I learned how different shops approach their customers and how they display their things and how kind of an insider's look at how things are done. And so I learned from that and from my own experience and kind of apply it day to day at the shop.
What an advantage.
Yeah.
So how would you describe your niche in the Portland area as far as your bike shop?
Well, everyone knows Portland's very progressive and in the cycling community, and I think recumbents, there is one other recumbent shop in town, but they specialize mostly in trikes and down to one or two brands. But we do, I say we're not a mom and pop shop, I mean, but we're, because we do a lot of business outside of Portland.
Oh.
So a lot of my time is spent on the internet, and with social media, of course, it's building a brand that goes. And thankfully, it's really helped.
Interesting. Yeah. So let's get down to the actual bikes. Start talking about those. So there are a lot of various kinds, like you mentioned at the outset, a lot of different kinds of recumbents. And so what are some of their features? And you touched on that, but what are some of the pros and cons of each of these, some of these different styles?
Well, the most important thing to think about in a recumbent is where the crank is compared to the seat. So a lot of people understand recumbents or the recumbent position from going to the gym and riding their exercise. Well, that position is similar.
Yeah.
And really the crank is below the seat on a lot of those exercise machines, and that would be called the equivalent in a upright or in a recumbent that you ride outside would be a long wheelbase. So when you're sitting there, it's like sitting in your car. You have your crank down below. So the point I'm trying to make is that as you raise the crank up compared to the seat, then you recline more.
Okay.
So when you see the racing ones, and we have pictures of the racing ones here, I know, the crank will be very high and the seat will be very laid back. And so those are the most aerodynamic and the fastest ones.
Yeah.
Right? So aerodynamically speaking, they are equal to the very best time trial bike, and sometimes even better.
Wow.
You're just laying down instead of going all the way forward. So when you see a time trialist or someone that rides a triathlon bike, right, they're all the way forward, and they've really refined that position over the years. Well, in recumbents, it's the same thing, only you're all the way back.
Okay.
Right? So you just think of it, to go fast, you either have to be at one extreme or the other. So everything in between, if we're talking about a trike or a long wheelbase, they are going to be a more comfortable all-around ride. It's equal to like a sports touring or regular average road bike, as far as what they're designed for.
So, and so how do you get faster on a recumbent? I mean, doesn't it take some training? Like if I came from an upright bike to a recumbent, I'd have to kind of redo my muscles a little bit.
That's true. So first is learning to ride it, and sometimes that's no big deal for someone, and sometimes it's a longer process because you really do steer. Because on an upright bike, you have a lot of your weight on the handlebars themselves, right? And so that gives you an added stability that people just take for granted. So when you're on a recumbent, you're actually steering from back here on your hips, right? And so you have hardly any weight on your handlebars, and that's the plus because you're not having the same kind of neck and back issues, right? And so when it's very lightly loaded, when someone gets on it, they grip too tight, and so they're trying to fight the bike. When really, when you let go and just relax, that's part of the deal. So once you learn to ride it, then we can talk about the fitness part about it. So you do use different muscles, and even a difference in the crank. We were talking about the crank and the seat height. So as you change that height, you're using different muscles again. So when I go and train and I'm riding, I'm using different bikes. I'm trying different bikes, and even if it's just a couple inches higher, I'm using different muscles. And so sometimes I'll switch between them because it'll keep me fresh every day and I can continue to train. So there's another positive to it. There's also, and we'll show pictures of it, but there's also front wheel drive recumbents now, and a bike company called Cruise Bike makes those. And those, for learning them, it's a different process, but once you learn it, you have that nice short drivetrain. And yeah, so that's the Cruise Bike S40. That's one. So this is a bike we designed in-house. And then they adopted it as their design, which was wonderful. So that got Bike of the Year in 2016, I think, or 2017. And that's the latest iteration of it. But this is what I'm talking about, modernizing, so it's more like an upright. Now, obviously, it's a recumbent, but I'm saying the oversized head tube, the through axles, all the little things that make what, the upright group, world has done for the last 5 years or so. So recumbents have been in this really static, for the last 20 years, they've almost not changed. So that's our push. That's part of what we're trying to do is say, hey, let's use the best ideas from the upright world and let's modernize it with, you saw the paint scheme and all that.
Yeah, that was slick.
Yeah, and so my business partner, Robert Haller, he also works for Cruise Bike. So he's the product manager for Cruise Bike. So we have a lot of, we do a lot in the industry.
Yeah.
And so it's not just the bike shop, and I guess I keep making that point. But
no,
yeah.
that's important. Yeah. You're not just sitting there selling product that comes to you. You're trying to innovate, come up with new ideas,
right.
and improve it for everybody.
Yes. And that's the plan. And I think it will be, because everyone's dream is to bring recumbents to a larger audience. Mm-hmm. But it hasn't happened for a number of reasons. One of which is, they're standing in their own light sometimes, and they enjoy it and they get groups together, but there's no real competitions, which is what drives sometimes technology is competition. Uh-huh. In BMX, it's like we always said it's the little league of cycling, which it is. Uh-huh. And so you can learn the skills that a lot of BMXers have gone on to be, road racers, or they've been mountain bikers, really good mountain bikers, and the different disciplines of mountain biking. And so those kind of things hasn't happened for recumbents yet. They compete well in ultra cycling events like the Ram or the Transamerica race. Mm-hmm. They compete well for any of the 12-hour races or 24-hour races, and a lot of records are held by recumbents in those kind of situations. Not all of them, right? Because the pool of riders or athletes is greater in the upright world. Okay. So you're going to have the best athletes generally on an upright bike because that's what the accepted norm is, right? So we're seeing that change a little bit. Yeah. And we're seeing younger people riding them because of COVID. Some people have come out of it, or we're still in the middle of it, but as they're imagining what they're going to do when they come out of it, there's a younger generation that wants to do adventure riding. They want to just have their bike and they want to put their bags on it, and they may have a trailer and they just want to go cross country. That's going to happen more, not organized rides. We were speaking earlier about organized rides before we started the show. Yeah. But so part of it, I think, is a switch to just doing these individual rides or with a small group, and because we have seen numbers kind of diminish on some of the rides.
Yeah. Well, and just our previous show was somebody talking about touring, loaded touring. Yeah. But not recumbent. But yeah, I mean that's interesting.
They make very good touring bikes, especially the long wheelbase, because you can load them down more than an upright and keep your stability. So part of touring is loading your bags correctly, right? And I'm sure that person talked about it. And so in a recumbent, you've stretched out the wheelbase so far, think Cadillac, right? And then the balance of the bike is not as affected. Now you still have to carefully load them, but you end up having a very stable platform. The front wheel drive ones that we showed, those work really well. And then part of what we're developing too is a system of, about the Transamerica riders that go unsupported from Astoria to the East Coast. So that's turning into a bigger deal now. Yeah. Right? So the challenge now is what can we do on our own? And instead of supported like Ram, Race Across America, which is a different animal. But these guys that are doing Trans Am, they're using, rather than using panniers or traditional setup, they're using bigger bags, and they kind of incorporate kind of this minimalist approach to riding. And so we're seeing more of that. And so we're trying to develop, we have someone that works with us, his name's Tobin Caldwell, and Tobin does bags. He worked for Montbell in Japan. And so he's very accomplished at making bags. And so part of what we're trying to do is incorporate and make parts and pieces that allow people to do those kind of touring.
Yeah. Well, you'd have to.
Yeah,
you got to have the product, to meet people's needs. So you've kind of talked about, I think, the future of recumbents, what you're trying to accomplish. Just kind of quickly before we go to our safety video, is there an electric assist recumbents? Are you putting e-bike type stuff.
Yes, so there's two different ways that's happening, which is one has been for the last 6 years for us, it's been putting a kit on an existing trike or bike. And slowly, and that's worked fairly well. The issue there is that the bikes and the trikes are not necessarily designed for electric.
Right.
Right. So the thing to keep in mind is that when you put on a motor that's say 500 watts, the average rider can only do 100 watts. We're not talking about elite athlete,
yeah.
but the average rider, if we took them off the street, would be able to do 100 watts, right? Continuous. So you're putting 5 more people on with you, right? On a frame that's designed for one person in a load. So you can see how when you add, sometimes people want 2 batteries and they want it, they want 750 watts, which is an American thing. That's what they want, power, right? And when you have that combination, then the bike itself suffers. In other words, we've seen more broken frames and more things like that. So we're starting to see the manufacturers, including us, make products that, frames that are designed for electric.
Okay.
Right?
Yeah.
So the differences are much larger diameter tubes, thicker tubes. You might give it more stability with the wheelbase or the width. So you're dealing with people that are averaging higher speeds than they normally would.
Yes. Yeah.
Right. Yeah, there's an example. So that's the Phoenix, which is a bike I designed, and with the help of Gerald Nichols at Rands. So this is one we developed together. And so this is the first 2-wheel recumbent with an incorporated motor in it. So you see it has what we call a shrouded motor. So that's a Bafang motor, but not a kit. So that's actually made for it. So the routing of the cables is internal, and it has disc brakes, which is, I guess, not too new in the recumbent world, but people are still using side poles and other types of V brakes. And now, so this was made for electric, and so that's one of our products.
Okay.
Yeah.
And there are tandem recumbents, I believe.
There are, yeah. And so there's trike versions, and there's there's 2-wheel versions, and they are used by couples for Rands was a company that made 2-wheel tandem recumbents, and then in the trikes there are 3 or 4 different manufacturers. Many times it's for the adaptive market. The trikes are.
Yeah.
And so they're really great for someone, a caretaker can ride the front, and then or even vice versa. The captain is. We sell them to sometimes the blind schools.
Yeah.
And people that can't necessarily ride it, gets them out there, and that's a really great thing. One of the good things about recumbents is they're so adaptive.
Yeah.
Especially the 3-wheelers.
That is right. The blind school I know in Vancouver. Yeah. Okay. Cool. Well, let's go ahead and go to a safety video, and then we'll come back and talk some more about recumbents with you. And so let's learn about bike safety, which applies to recumbents and upright.
Bike safe, bike smart.
Hi, my name is Xander.
And my name's Elizabeth.
Over the next few minutes, we're gonna have some fun and talk about some pretty important stuff.
Some of it you've heard before, but it never hurts to hear it again.
And again.
And again. So here we go. Did you know that bikes are considered vehicles?
Meaning you have to follow the same rules as someone driving a car.
And why do we have rules?
To keep us safe and to keep things moving smoothly.
That means when you ride in the street, ride in a straight line with traffic on the right side of the road. Riding against traffic is dangerous. It puts you where the driver of a car isn't expecting you.
Meaning he might turn in front of you, or worse, into you.
And you know what that means.
Ouch.
And if you're riding with friends, always ride single file. And here's something else to remember. Always obey traffic lights and signs, and pay attention to lane markings.
When you see one of these, stop. When you see one of these, yield. Traffic might be coming from one side or the other.
Now, since your bike doesn't come with turn signals,
Use your hands.
but always check for traffic before you turn. Do this to turn left, this to turn right. Also, some states allow you to do this to turn right, and do this to stop.
Did you know that 70% of car-bicycle crashes happen at driveways or intersections?
So before you enter a street, stop, look left, right, then left again. And use caution at intersections. Be careful. Don't be a statistic.
Hey, now a word about staying alert.
If you're riding your bike, Xander,
Hey,
if you're riding your bike, leave your headphones at home or stick them in a backpack. Because if you put them on your head, you won't be able to hear the traffic around you.
bike safe, bike smart.
Always great advice in our safety videos, and as a longtime cyclist, I really appreciate the refreshers on the show. So I want to welcome you back to the rest of our show. I usually take this opportunity to encourage people to get out and do certain events that I know that our local clubs and organizations are doing. It's fall. I want to encourage you to, listen to Jonathan here about all the different options that are available. Sometimes we get kind of single tracked here with the upright bike. And I know many of you got bikes as a kid, and if it was too big, they just said, oh, you'll grow into it. And if things didn't feel very well, maybe your hands hurt or something, well, that was okay. You were a kid, you didn't care. But even if you get a good proper fit on an upright bike, maybe that's just not working for your body. We've all gotten older. Maybe we've been in a car accident or something, had surgery. Things are not quite perfect with most of our bodies. So there's just so many resources to explore to get you out on a bike. And we're learning about some of those on the show right now. So these bikes can be a solution. And again, maybe just getting a proper fit on an upright bike is your solution. And in addition, like we just talked about before the break, adding some kind of electric assist might be part of your solution if you're not as fit as maybe you'd like to be or you once were. And I just want you to all be aware of all the options that are available that Jonathan is trying to share with us. So I really appreciate it. So don't give up. Look into things, investigate. And whatever you're rolling on, Portland Bicycling Club welcomes, tandems, recumbents. We've even had somebody this summer on rollerblades, but that's another thing altogether. But, come on out and join us. By riding with other people, you really gain bicycle skills and learn new routes, and it's just a lot of fun. And like I said, we saw the other group that is just all recumbents, and they have a good time too. So here we are back at the rest of our show. So generally, what are some of the reasons to investigate the idea of riding recumbents, kind of touching on what I was just saying, when you're shopping for bikes?
So we kind of touched a little bit on it, which is it could be for touring. It could be for racing, if you're an ultra cycle racing. It could be for commuting. It can be because you haven't ridden in 20 years or 30 years, and there's a lot of those people, which is hard for me to imagine, I'm sure you too, that have not ridden a bike as an adult, and they're trying to explore different ways to get out there. And then there are also lifelong cyclists that, as you were mentioning, aren't able to ride their upright bike anymore. So those are all good reasons. There's also the adaptive reason where if you need to, you can only steer with one hand or something like that. Recumbents, especially the trikes, are good for that, right? So when you shop for recumbent, the fit is just as important. And it's one of the things, it's one of the myths that have been that you're automatically more comfortable. Well, that's not necessarily true. Sometimes people get on it and they are more comfortable. Other times it requires as much or more fitting than an upright.
Oh.
And the reason is the seat angle changes on a recumbent, right? So it's most of them have a seat angle that you can move and adapt for different people. And that can be a personal thing. It can also be part of the design. So we were talking about the relationship of the crank compared to the seat. So when you lay it back, it's just like an easy chair. As you go further back, ergonomically, you have to raise the crank up. So the cranks are fixed. So we have to only a certain range that it's usable, right? So I would say the fit's very important. A lot of people do a lot of research based on some other ideal, but it's really why it's so important to come in and test a recumbent if you can, or ride a friend's, because they are very different.
Yeah.
But the trikes are especially good for people that have balance issues, obviously. When you take the balance out of the equation, you can go up hills. If you're not fast, it doesn't matter. You can
Right.
stop in the middle of the hill. And yeah, so that the trike shown there is a delta trike. So a delta trike is 2 wheels in the back and 1 wheel in the front. These are not as popular as a Tadpole. If we can show a Tadpole there. Yeah, so this is a Tadpole trike from our friends at Performer Trikes. And this Tadpole just means 2 wheels up front and 1 in back. And these are very popular. This is the most common sold because they have everything is just like a regular bike as far as drivetrain. The only thing special is it has a longer chain.
Yeah.
It has idlers for it. And then the front hubs are made just for that. But as far as you can go into any bike shop and they can generally work on it. And so these are very popular. They're low to the ground. They're very stable, right? So that's what a lot of people purchase as their first recumbent, that style of Tadpole.
And we've got some of those in the club, and before the show we were talking as one of our club members had fallen on an upright bike and just wasn't comfortable anymore, and
Right.
that, like you were saying, and so she talked to you and ended up with a trike of some sort with an e-assist, electric assist, and it's just been good to see her be independent again and be out on a bike, which she wanted to do. So that was that particular solution.
Yeah, and sometimes there's more and more e-assist. I would say 50% of what we sell is e-assist
Wow.
on the trikes now. And some people don't want it, but
Yeah.
if you're an independent rider, sometimes they don't want it. But if you are riding with a group, then the electric is good for the trikes because you're generally about, I'd say 4 miles an hour slower average than you would be on an upright.
Yeah.
Right. So the electric makes up, it's the great, equalizer, we say. And so it allows people to ride and be social as well as get their workout. So it's been a good thing. I think electric has gotten more people, and COVID is the proof of that. In the upright companies, they've sold out. I mean, just so many bikes are being made, and there's more people out riding. And I think that's an important part of the equation for all the types.
And I think that's kind of a joke in our club, is that the upright riders are getting e-bikes, and so the people on the recumbents or the trikes have to get an e-assist to keep up, because now the uprights are faster yet.
Right.
And we're all getting older, and so it's kind of this kind of squirrely thing
it's
going on where we try to keep
trying
up.
to keep it all together, right? Now that I'm going to talk briefly about that. If you'll put up the titanium high racer bike, and that gives an example of another style of bike. There you go. So this bike, it's called a Mystique. This is one I designed, but the main reason I want to show it to you is, remember we were talking about how high the crank is compared to the seat. So cranks, people say, well, I want the crank here. Well, the crank has to be a certain height over the wheel so it clears. Right?
Oh, yeah.
So when the crank is down at the lowest position, you still want to be able to turn the bike. So that's why they have a high crank. The other reason they have a high crank is because it's more aerodynamic, right? So the higher that is, the more you can lay that seat down. When that seat's laid down, that's where you get the free speed, so to speak.
Yeah,
So this
yeah.
bike, at the Cookie Monster, I was able to average 21.6 miles an hour.
Whoa.
So it was a very fast
Average.
day. Yeah, average.
Wow.
Yeah, so I was cooking about 25 most of the time.
Yeah.
And so that makes, And that's a testimony to the speed, because some people are going to ask, are they fast? Well, they're fast if you train, right?
Yeah.
And they're fast if you buy the right machine. So that's why this relates to your question, in the fact that you want to make sure you're buying the machine, bike or trike or upright, for your intended purpose.
Yes.
Right? That's the most important thing, because what we don't want to see, and we've seen it for years, is bikes that are just parked in the garage. We're trying to avoid that.
Right.
And that happens through education and realizing the realities of a certain type of bike, right?
Yes.
Right?
And
Because it's not always what you imagine it is.
Yeah. Pro or con.
Right, pro or con.
Yeah.
Right? Sometimes it can be more than you imagine. Right? We romanticize things. And so that's part of it, is like, make sure you ask your person you're buying it from, you know, if it's a professional, you say, well, they'll ask you, what are you going to use it for?
Yes.
Right? And then they can help steer you to the right direction. Because there's also a lot of bike shops know, I know there's a lot of Craigslist and Facebook marketplace exchanges, but they're not going to give you the expertise that a bike shop will.
Right.
And the reason is, as a bike shop mechanic or owner, you see thousands of bikes. And so you have this base of knowledge that you can share with people. And that's important. It's part of what people are trying to avoid, bike shops, or not go as many and not go to them, necessarily. And I think it's an important thing to say, whether it's upright or recumbent, you have to trust some of their knowledge, right?
So I think, kind of on that same line, like you're saying, before you even look at bikes, you need to think, what kind of riding do I want to do? And gravel riding, for example, is becoming popular. Maybe that's what you want to do.
Right.
And then be willing to invest some time at a bike shop or many bike shops to explore some of the different options, and not just grab the first thing you see.
Right. And that's important to avoid that bike or trike being parked somewhere and not ever being used.
Yeah.
And I think that's my big push, is like, I like to see people on bikes, doesn't matter the type.
Yeah.
I just like to see them out there, and it makes a better world for all of us.
Yes. Yeah.
Doesn't matter the type.
I agree. I think it's, if nothing else, I think it's good for our mental health, and we
Yeah.
need that right now. We need a little help. So let's see here. I wanted to talk about safety factors with recumbents. Some of the trikes are, like you mentioned earlier, are kind of low to the ground. And how do you feel? Are they more safe, less safe, or is it the rider?
Well, part of it is, from the rider standpoint, as far as visibility, right? So you can see very well. You can generally see better than upright, just because you're laid back a little bit. You're sitting in the chair, so you have a better view of the road than being stooped over the handlebar. So there's that positive from the rider standpoint. So you have a very good view of the scenery and traffic and all the things that we go through as cyclists, all the challenges. We're out there playing Frogger sometimes, and that's just the reality of a bike or a trike. So in a trike recumbent specifically, people do tend to give you more room. They assume you're disabled, right? That's part of the myth, right? But that assumption gives you a little extra room when you're out and about, because they're going to go up and around you. Now, as far as personal comfort, there are people that ride them on the trails, they ride them on the road, they ride them everywhere and upright. Then there are other people that just have them and they drive to their trail and they ride the Banks Vernonia Trail or something like that. So it's partially what you prefer or what you feel comfortable with. Now, the steps you take are flashing lights or flags, and those are some of the important things. On the two-wheel recumbents, they're usually sit high enough so they're the same height as an upright. Your head's almost the same height, and so that they're not as they're more easily seen. And but again, it doesn't matter what kind of bike all types can be a dangerous pastime.
Yes, all kinds can. That's true. And I think some of the trikes use the flags. I'm not sure.
Yeah, they use flags, and so
That
some people
kinda
use they'll use a flag so it'll sit at eye level for a driver, right? And you can cut them down and make them different heights. And then some people use two flags, and they'll use lights. And so thankfully, we have our customers have had a really good safety record, and I hope that continues. I mean, it's like I said, it's really, I have customers that commute all the way into Beaverton and back from downtown, you know. So there's those people. So it's, you know, just like everything else, it depends on what you feel comfortable with.
Yeah.
But as far as safety, I think that if you're careful and you realize the positives and the negatives, that you can take advantage of, you know, the positives.
Yeah.
Right.
So I meant to ask, are recumbents more ergonomic?
I would say when fitted correctly, that is true. So we talked a little bit about the seat angle. So just like uprights, that angle is almost particular for a certain person. You may feel comfortable at a certain degree, right? When people first buy a recumbent, they want to sit bolt upright because they're used to that.
Yeah.
Well, recumbents are better if you balance the weight between your butt and your back, right? So when you balance that weight, you get the best of both, right? You get the load distributed, your weight distributed between this whole, you know, plane, right? So when you're on when you try to sit on a recumbent and you're really bolt upright, you're putting a lot of weight on your butt, right? So that's more of a problem on a long wheelbase where you have the crank very low. So to combat that, they have different padding and different types of shapes, and seats will be what they call hard shell, or some will be mesh seats. And a mesh is like a flow-through seat. It's more like a lawn chair. They always joke about lawn chairs.
Yeah.
But the material is actually more high-tech than that. And now they're starting to use three-dimensional. This one doesn't have it, but this one has a mesh seat, and then you can see this breathes better. So a lot of people find this very comfortable. The racing ones, like we showed earlier, are more form-fitting because you're using the seat to push against.
Oh,
right?
Okay.
So it's what's comfortable, and that, again, it's down to the style. Am I commuting?
Yeah.
Am I going to commute, 10 miles to work and back? Then a mesh seat might be the best because you have that breathability, and you get a nice flow, airflow.
Yeah.
When you're racing or you're going fast, you're more inside and you're tucked in a little seat that you can push against. They're made out of carbon fiber. They're going to be much lighter, but they're much more firm.
Yes. So I'd noticed that as you were showing the bikes that the seats were quite different, and I didn't understand why that was.
Yeah.
That makes a lot of sense. That's interesting.
Yeah, here's another
there's
example.
one.
So this one is actually a carbon fiber recumbent. It's a high racer like the other style we showed. And you'll see that this is a kind of a hybrid seat. It's a cross between a mesh and a hard shell. So it actually is like a little trampoline. You can't see it under that pad, but it actually floats. So sometimes when it's made out of carbon and it's very stiff, they'll put that kind of seat on it. And they're an option on a lot of different bikes, but that shows, and then it has basically what's a foam pad on the top. And so there's pads that are made out of foam like that, and then there's pads that are woven out of a plastic material, and they have a lot of breathability too. Yeah, so that's a good example there.
Yeah, that was a great comparison. So let's delve into the innovative side. So you've kind of woven that into your story today, and you showed us some of the things. How did you move into being innovative? Did you just see a need, or?
I started really young when I was 10, drawing BMX bikes, right? And I used to go to my friends that were also BMX riders, and I was like, can I measure your bike, and can I, get the angles off it? I had a little angle finder, and I would write and keep all these scrapbooks when I was young. And so then I went into the freestyle part of it. And then when I originally got into recumbents because of the mechanical part of it, because it was the only place where innovations were happening. Like in the upright world, it's very small and there's little changes.
Yeah.
And we'll see through axles, or we'll see little changes, but I couldn't make a big splash in the upright world. I had 2 different frame building companies, and we built special bikes. We built, dual slalom bikes and BMX bikes and different triathlon bikes, but people were happy with what we were doing, but we couldn't make a big splash. So that's part of it. Part of it is recumbents. It's a very small pond. It's only 2% of the market, actually 1%, because they count tandems and recumbents together.
Oh.
So it's changing slowly, but it's a very, very small part of the cycling world. It's so small, that's why the big companies don't really pay attention to it, right?
Yeah.
Which is beneficial, and the opposite, right? So part of my push was when I saw that, okay, recumbents haven't done anything in 15 years, like there's no innovation coming up. I said, well, what can I apply that I've learned in the upright world towards recumbents? So the titanium bike we showed earlier, the long wheelbase bike we showed, there's a blue one there. I know I sent there's a slide of a blue one that's a long wheelbase. That's the front wheel drive one. There's another long wheelbase one that's blue. Yeah, there you go. So this is the Phoenix. So this is one of the first models I helped develop, which is dual 700C wheels, which didn't really exist as a production bike.
Oh.
So this has the same size wheels as a traditional road bike, right? So now you can share the wheels, the carbon wheels, you can share the fenders and all these things that you couldn't do before. Those were all had to be special things before.
Yeah.
1.1/8" head tube, all the things, all the technical things that make it more compatible with an upright bike so someone can go, oh, I want the really nice Shimano cranks, or I want the really nice carbon wheels. Well, now you can do it. Now you have a machine that can take advantage of the modern technology. So that's part of what we're doing.
Yeah.
Before that, recumbents had different size wheels. They had little wheels, and they had things that were much
Right.
harder to just get, right? And so that's changed. So that's part of the innovation that I brought.
That is really great, especially the idea of having the fenders and all that. You, especially around here, you
Yes.
kind of need fenders at
Yeah.
some point or another. So
Yeah. And then you asked about fairings too. Or,
Yeah, fairings.
So fairings
Like-
on that bike we just showed, it had a small fairing. But traditionally in the long wheelbase bikes, the fairings work very well. Our friend Lonnie that we talked about earlier, so he helped develop how to put the fairings on correctly. So for aerodynamics, they work really well on long wheelbase bikes because you need to sit very close to the fairing to get an advantage, right? You want the air coming up and over you, right? Rather than coming back behind the fairing, and then actually they cause more resistance.
Yeah.
So you won't see them on the high racers generally, unless people don't understand the concept. So they'll have the fairing way out front, and it doesn't do any good. So you'll see fairings on that. The other reason to have a fairing on a long wheel base or a trike, you can have them on a trike. You're not going to gain really any speed on a trike, but you're going to have protection from the weather. So in our climate, with all the rain, it really does help.
So I've seen, I don't know if you call them fairings, kind of nylon or kind of kite-like material, just kind of around people.
Yeah, so that's
I don't know if that's a fairing or some kind of weather protection or what that is.
So they call that a body sock.
Oh, okay.
And the body sock is a continuation of the fairing. And they use a heavier duty, thicker plastic, or I can't remember the name of it, but they use a thicker version of it, and then they Velcro that body sock, and they're shaped, and then they have a structure in the back for the tail. So that way you can have the best of both. You can have a very efficient machine that has this, they're harder to get in and out of, but it can be it takes a lot less wattage, so it gets closer to a high racer in speed, but you have that added complication, right, of getting in and out. So, but very popular here in the Northwest. That was Lonnie's too.
Oh,
Yeah,
okay.
You know, a lot of pushing that here.
Yeah, I worked STP, and you see that kind of stuff because they're trying to make some time.
Yeah.
So not just a club ride; they're trying to get from here to there. What about if we're maybe overweight and wanting to get exercises? Are recumbents still a good idea?
They're very good. Now the manufacturers have made recumbents. Performer has, and so has Green Speed. They've made recumbents that are rated for 400 pounds, which is higher than some upright bikes.
Yeah.
And so they've also made the seats wider. They've made different pieces to get in and out, right? Helping handles, they call them. And so they people can get on and sit down and actually exercise again. I mean, people that have not ridden, like we talked about, and they're like, their doctor's recommending they ride. Well, there are trikes for that, especially, right? And so they allow, especially with electric assist, they can get out. And we've had customers that have lost 70, 80 pounds, because they're doing something they love to do.
Yeah.
It's easy to do, but they can also progress. Those motors, as you know, have different settings.
Yeah.
and the most advanced ones have torque sensitive, so they're analyzing how much power you're putting and then adding a certain amount to it, right? So they're very getting more high tech.
That's great. I hadn't thought about the whole seat thing. That would be, it seems like that
They
would
have
be
to be
key.
wider, yeah.
So just kind of wrapping up, how would you encourage somebody to really look at recumbents? Certainly you've touched on that throughout, but just kind of a bullet point here.
Well, this is a little complicated, but you have to ask yourself about the social part of it, because upright cycling has a very social kind of platform already. They have organized ride, and as they're people like the Portland Wheelman Club that are welcoming other types of cycling, that's really important, and so that opens up the doors for people that are just getting in. So the people, like we talked about, that are looking for it have very specific needs sometimes, and sometimes they're just fun.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
It could be there's a lot of people that come from unicycles and things like that, and they just want something different, right? And so there's that group too. But I would encourage everyone to consider it, and that's part of. I'm not judging them better or worse. I'm saying that I would consider it as a possibility if you think it'll fit your needs.
Yeah, yeah. So again, that was the whole point of having you on, is to talk about the possibility that there are other options out there for whatever reason, fun or necessity, whatever. So you've really given us a lot to think about, a lot of education about this, way more than I had anticipated. So thank you very much.
Thanks for having me.
So we want to thank our guest, Jonathan Garcia, for joining us and telling us all about recumbents and why you might want one. It's really his passion since 10 years old. So I hope you know more about recumbents than you did at the start, and I hope that when you want to ride a bike, if you're not right now, you think about that, or if you just want to make a change for whatever reason. Again, if you're riding with other people, it really increases your skills. You learn new routes. You learn how to ride in groups, so that some of these event rides, you know how to, just what the protocol is, not the laws or anything, but how people behave in group riding. So it's a good way to learn about other rides and what's going on, some of the events rides, and the social aspect, as Jonathan touched on, that meeting new people. So thanks for joining us, and we'll see you next time.